Okay, so welcome to the third Thursday Poetry Series. This is got a very nice audience here. Um, so this began, as I've often said when I've introduced poets, this series began in 2005, and it was started by the first poet laureate of Takoma Park, Don Berger, and Ann Becker, who was here. Where is Ann? Ann is over here. Ann was the second poet laureate of Takoma Park. This whole Third Thursday series is a project of the Arts and Humanities Commission of Takoma Park, and it reflects the commitment that the city has to the arts in this city. I can be rather chauvinistic about it all, but all you have to do is step out into the into the center of the community center. You'll see art exhibit. There's one every month or every 6 weeks. There's an outdoor sculpture exhibits that Richard Lorr has participated in his sculpture. A number of different projects going on. In fact, one thing I've done here, these are some of the Spring for Poetry posters that we've been doing through the Friends of the Takoma Park, Maryland Library since 2007. You'll see those of you who live in Takoma Park or walk the streets will see them on Carroll Avenue, and they're in the parks as well. They're designed by students of Montgomery College. So that's a little plug for Takoma Park. Behind the scenes of this whole thing is Sarah Daines, who is usually anonymous back here. She is the director. That's right. She's the Director of Housing and Community Housing Development, or Housing and Community Development. And we now have a new coordinator, Brendan, who was on crutches, Brendan Smith. And he's going to be helping out, more than helping out, coordinating this and other arts projects. I just have a couple of other acknowledgments to make, that there is a committee that has selected the poets, and that committee is Ann Becker, Mary Beth Hayden, Madonna LeBlanc, I think Martin Fitzpatrick is still with us, and me. My name is Merrill Leffler. Tonight we have three poets, as you all know. You're here, Randy Bridgeman, Grace Cavalieri, and Richard Lorr. Before I introduce them, everybody has a copy of this, right? I want to call your attention to a couple of things. If you look in the back, you'll see that there are the upcoming readings for the rest of the year. You'll see also, and especially for those of you who are poets who want to participate in this program, there's a call for poets. We're not going to be making the selections until the spring, but you can still submit anytime. Okay, so take a look at that. And then there are a number of other programs that are coming up. I'm not going to go through them, but I do want to call your attention to December 9th. That's the Takoma Park Holiday Art Sale, and this whole space out here. There will be lots of artists and craftspeople, and we have a book sale from the Friends book sale. Okay, that dispenses with the machinery here. Randy Bridgeman is going to be the first reader. You know, I've referred to a quote by Hugh Kenner before, in which he says, what is a poem? But it's a poet's act of attention that is trying to get yours. And there are different ways of getting attention, but we get a sense of what he or she is particularly attentive to. But the question is how, whether it's the lines, the pacing, the rhythms, their music, so to speak. That's one thing, which helps to create a voice. The tropes, whether they're metaphor or similes, metonymy, or even lack of them. There's some poets who are writing in prose lines and eschewing, not using that. So Randy, and we're going to see tonight, or hear tonight, not see, but three very different voices, which is I think it's going to be wonderful. Not I think, it will be. Randy's work, as you will see, there's a certain kind of, and I don't mean this in any pejorative way, has on the surface a breezy kind of narration. There's storytelling, and he is, it's like a poem called The RV Guy, or why he don't flip people off anymore. It's not quite a tough guy stance, but it has that feeling of being offhand, of being in conversation. It's like sitting in a bar and you're 3 stools down and you're hearing this guy talking. You say, what is he saying? It sounds really interesting. And it is. You will see, you'll be taken by that. So I don't want to get in this way, but I do want to just say, so here's an example of what I mean by the seemingly offhand. And I shouldn't say seemingly, it is offhand, but it pulls you into the poem. So this is called Poetry Readings, an appropriate poem to read some lines from. I want to hear poetry that comes shooting out of you like the beer shits. I could give a rat's ass about the good old boys in Letterman sweaters. I want to hear about that boy you dragged home from a single-parent home in government-subsidized housing on the other side of a town. So I'd like to be sitting and hearing his, and we have a chance. We're not able to drink here, but we can hear Randy tonight. So, Randy Bridgeman.
So tonight, I was going to tone it down a little bit. You know, so somebody ought to wake me up. I got a chance to read with Grace, and I'm just over the moon with that. Thank you. I've been trying to do that for a while. So I'm going to read some poems. Just follow with me. I'm going to read some poems about my youth and about religion, and about getting drunk, about life, things like that. All right, so this is called Jameson Street. A lone yellow flower, half-weed, growing in the driveway crack, was planted by wind and chance. It survived the hardier domestic hybrids sheltered by our house from a northwestern winter. It didn't interest me then. I made nothing of my father's careful covering of the flower with his car at night, his shift over at the factory, the heat from the engine block keeping frost away. He always parked there, no reason to make anything of it. So what if he idled the car listening to the radio, smoking one last cigarette before coming in to dinner? He said it made it easier to start in the mornings. Besides, what would have been the point in playing a game with Winter that he couldn't win? My mother's knuckles were swollen red from the rub of wet cotton. She walked the backyard grass down to a dirt path between the clothesline poles. On wash days, she stripped our beds and opened our windows to the fresh air, then took our dirty things away to be scoured clean. Before seat belts, I rode all the way through 3 states in the back window of my father's Chevrolet. There was something safe about being in that car, his hands on the steering wheel. He spent his spare time under the hood, tightening and cleaning and changing hoses. Every Saturday, it was washed and waxed, rain or shine. It was garage kept, and on cold mornings he backed it out into the driveway and sat idling until the oil pressure rose in its block. He loved that car, and I him. The summer of my mother's breakdown, the Assembly of God and the Methodists and the Baptists showed up at our door to tell us God doesn't give us any more than we can handle. Right before my mother threw them out. Standing at the sink, she rolled dough out onto a Formica countertop, cutting biscuits out with a water glass, looking out the window in a way that made me understand she needed more. This is called Gridlock in Mudville. We walked barefoot following snake-back patterns left by tractor tires all the way to those old woods at the edge of our father's fields, those woods that changed this patch of earth we inhabited, changed something in our mood or in our blood or in our past. In them, we stripped down, painted ourselves in pond mud. She twisted pine sprigs and crepe myrtle into her hair. I spiked mine into horns. We sharpened sticks for spears, hunted pickups, traveling the dirt roads to town, chased our prey from the shadows, weaving in and out of branches the way those first two must have. How alive it made us feel before we understood our nakedness, and how this has made me wonder if God realized that when he drove those two from the garden to till his soil, they would have to kill the trees. Okay, so before I went in the Navy, I was in the Navy for 26 years. Before I went in, I lived with this old lady. I rented a room from her. This is called Landlady. Sometimes she'd lie in bed for days. A woman strangled by memories. I'd mow the lawn, rake the leaves, bring her groceries. She'd unravel, surfacing after midnight, vacuuming and hosing down her windows at 3 a.m. She'd walk the dark yard with one good eye, pulling weeds, watering flowers, always moving. She was the wandering Jew. One night she asked me to help her clean her basement, scooping armfuls of the past into garbage cans. I threw out newspapers, tossed empty bottles and jars that she washed and saved like children. She came from the old country, crammed tradition and clothes into a bag, and rode the waves out of duty, chained herself to her husband's dreams. Evenings then in Northern California were graveyard quiet, and she'd stand in the kitchen, her hair twisted in a steel blue bun in the 40-watt light, her lips flat as collapsed sails. She cooked for hours, bent over cream sauces that tasted like dinner napkins, while cancer thickened in her. But she kept dying in the pocket of her frayed apron and sang lullabies in her native tongue as I dried the dishes and listened. Where are all the happy people? If there were any, wouldn't they be shouting in the streets? She said. I tell her, I don't know. Her name was Catherine, and she grew up in Warsaw, fed 14 children 3 times a day, spooning it out as careful as the KGB. She told me the only thing she owned in Poland was a broom. There was a hernia in her voice. Let the rabbi dig my grave, she told me. I don't know if she was mad or sincere, but I couldn't go to the funeral. Okay, so now we get around to it. The X. My name was a box of rocks she carried around to the grocery store, to the laundromat, to our bed. For years, nothing Margaret touched grew, and I never missed an opportunity to remind her. But 6 months after she left me for good, my thumb turned a dog turd brown in the pocket of my jeans as I watched the city come alive through the iron railings of her garden veranda, her blue hydrangeas, lavender in the setting sun, the city 6 stories down vibrating in the stems of her peace lilies. pink gardenias and roses staring up from terracotta pots washed orange in her evening watering. Love poems. In writing your love poems, please remind me of your hairpin on our crumpled bed sheets, the one that stabbed me in the ass, your frayed slippers and your cat I tripped over on the way to the john, my cursing and your giggling like fingernails on a blackboard, how the dog shit on the doormat, soiling the times, and all because we stayed in bed too late Sunday. Do me a favor and write with your green plastic fountain pen, the one with the chewed ends, and use paper torn from that cheap school exercise book, the one you used for our first love notes. Then tape it to the inside of my lunch pail so I'm reminded once again why. Okay, so my grandfather was a minister, and he was in a church that spoke in tongues, and it scared the hell out of me so bad I became a Baptist. So this poem, and I used to sit in his study and listen to him write, his sermons and, mess around or whatever. And I used to wonder, okay, so how does this book pertain to me right now as I'm living? So this is a poem kind of about that, and it's called The Odd Testament. By the way, it's from my book, The Odd Testament. God was the first single parent, certainly not the last to be out there busting his ass to keep the lights and water on, trying to make ends meet or a better life for his children. Nor was he the first to leave commandments like the ones written in magic marker and taped to refrigerators all over America. Come straight home after school, don't open the door to strangers, and don't eat the sweets. It'll spoil your dinner. Sure, it was job security, but it must have been a bitch working for the man. No upward mobility, not even a salvation plan. If there'd been a Ford station wagon with a rattling muffler and a bumper sticker that said, "Take this job and shove it," offered up by the snake, you can bet your Bible, baby, things would have turned out differently. He'd been the irresponsible one, packing up the family in the middle of the night and moving to the other coast to start over again, stiffing the landlord for the rent and never looking back. There's no place to hide on the desert, not from lightning or sun or God. And I imagine Abraham beside Isaac, saddled down with wood, Isaac questioning the sacrifice. I'm reminded of the times I was alone with my father and how our walks were like walking in sand. And I wonder if Abraham was disappointed when God called the whole thing off. When that big fish hawked Jonah up on the beach, his skin and hair bleached white from intestinal acid, and he heard, "Arise and go," by God, he got up and went, thinking better of doing what he was told, like all sons who fled from fathers in disobedience, finding themselves tossed overboard to lighten someone's load. Why raise Lazarus? To be absent of the body is to be free of this world. I've heard it said in sermon after sermon and funerals too. Lazarus must have been surprised and pissed too. 4 days dead, stinking to high heaven, after he'd confessed to family he'd wronged, been forgiven his debts, made peace with his neighbors. And I'm reminded once again of how human it is to want those we love alive. All right. So I think I've got a couple more minutes here. This is called The Way Things Go. And this has always been the way things have gone for me. All right? My mother dragged me out of the 5 and dime by the nape of my neck when the checkout man found a set of Roy Rogers pearl-handled 6-shooters complete with silver bullets in the belt pushed up under my coat. Come on. They'd been right there at the top of my Christmas list, and I'd been a good boy. And what did I get? Lincoln Logs, a Daniel Boone lunchbox with a matching thermos, and a pair of black and white saddle shoes from my grandmother, which I refused to wear because only girls wore saddle shoes. My father beat my ass in the middle of Western Auto because I had a death grip on the new model Western Flyer. With the built-in headlight and the chrome fenders and the white sidewall tires. Come on. It was right there at the top of my birthday list. I'd been good. I'd taken out the garbage without being told, and I'd kept the lawn mowed all summer, and what did I get? An erector set, an Apollo astronaut lunchbox with a matching thermos, and another pair of black and white saddle shoes from my grandmother, which my dad made me wear to school to atone for his embarrassment at Western Auto. I fell head over heels for Gretchen Schmidt, a girl from the other side of town who played piano with the best of them, a serious student who only had time for the smart boys. Come on. I could be a smart boy too. I'd studied hard that semester. I'd joined the English club. I'd brought my grades up to a respectable C-. And what did I get? Gretchen's big brother kicked the shit out of me in the lunchroom because I was wearing saddle shoes. And because I wouldn't leave his sister alone. But mostly because I was wearing saddle shoes. Okay. Okay, so I live way down south, down there by Point Lookout. And I'm from the Pacific Northwest. And my wife is from down there in southern Maryland. And after I got out of the Navy, she followed me around for 26 years. So I said, okay, we'll stay here. I still don't get it. Right? But anyway, I still, it's like Twilight Zone down there, right? So anyway, a bunch of Republicans, right? All right, so this is called Facing the Chesapeake, where I live down there. Wind through my front porch screen is rummaging through fishing gear, whistling in the lips of empty beer bottles, turning the pages of books I had best intentions of reading this summer. Clouds are stacking up on the bay, and the weatherman has said for weeks that it's going to rain, but it doesn't. The fishing report says the croaker are biting, but they're not. I've fished this point all of my life, baited my hook with the hopes of something more, wet my line in the comings and goings of an ordinary life, then waited for good things to happen, but they don't. Change comes on slowly out here past the end of county maintenance. Life here is a 2-lane back road, one way in and one way out. Am I close? Am I getting close? Okay. One more? All right. So. Okay. Hold on just a second. Yeah. Okay, so we've had a lot of people protest, you know, protest poems, all those type of poems about gun control. This is my protest poem about gun control. It's called Why I Don't Own a Gun. There's this squirrel that lives at the end of my driveway who every morning makes a run for it. I've slammed on the brakes, sent my coffee into the windshield, banged my head off the steering wheel, and I think it's been sent there to teach me something, say for the times when on my way to work while thinking about my asshole co-workers, I've sped up and left a few of his friends, maybe a close family member or two on the road, white belly up and flat. On a good day, a half a dozen or so before I get to the main drag, but this little bastard just won't let it go. He wants to make a point, just like everyone else I know. I've taken out several of my wife's azaleas in a row of mailboxes in 10 feet of the neighbor's hedge trying to kill this little prick. And still, every morning, there he is. So I take out a few more of his slow-moving relatives and impale them on sticks at the end of my driveway just to let him know I'm not fucking around. But it freaks out the neighborhood kids and their parents complain, so I buy a slingshot to whack this little son of a bitch, but I end up shooting the neighbor's dog in the ass because he likes to shit on my lawn. Then I pick off a few of my neighbor's yard gnomes because I hate those fucking things. Then I shoot out the taillights of a 2013 Jaguar parked across the street because I'm pissed off because he's got one and I don't. So I take a couple of pot shots at George, who's out mowing his lawn. And I hear him say, "God damn bees." So I shoot at the mailman too. Thank you. Thank you.
I said you can hear three very different voices tonight, and Randy got us started. So, how do I introduce Grace? Understated, right. We've known each other for many, many years. We are the two seniors in the room. I brought over some of Grace's books of poetry here. These are not all of them, just as as a display, but to say how long she has been engaged, not only in poetry. In fact, last year, right around this time, I had written a review of a last book before this one called With, and I began by saying that she's a dynamo. Poet, which you know, playwright, reviewer, anthologist, publisher, interviewer, broadcaster. Many of you know the poet and the poem that Grace originated at WPFW. How many years ago is it? 40 years ago, and it now comes from the Library of Congress. So on successive nights or from maybe moment to moment, she could take on any kind of role. But tonight we're here to hear her as a poet, and I think that's the foundational Grace, the poet. Grace has been compelling our attention for many years. One, with all these books, so we continually are reading into her poetic life, but it's also a life that's created by the poem. It is her, but it's also, the poems have a life of their own, I think. I'm not going to read from the review, but I made a couple of notes that in which I just said that there are poems here whose charm, and to me it's the charm, that, is a warm narrative tone, the clarity, episodes from the whole life that goes back to childhood, covers family, marriage, especially, for many years, all these years until Ken Flynn, who was many things himself, a flyer, but a wonderful sculptor as well. And so all these elements, and we become intimates in this life and in this poetic life. And there's a new book that you have now, right? Which, is that a selected poems? A compendium, okay. So there are glimpses that, that we would have. I think one of the things that, that there are elegies, there are paeans to love, to friendship, but through it all, there's a sense, and it's in this poem here. I wanted to say that there's a sense of the spirits that we live amidst that many of us are not aware of, but that Grace is, and it's reflected in those poems, and it's in this poem as well. So it's really a pleasure to welcome Grace here again.
40 years together. Yeah, I say after he gets out, it's like standing in the gold if you stand where he's been. And as for Randy, come on, that was terrific. Come on. This is the new book that Meryl mentioned, put out by ASP, which is Jimmy and Rose Solero and Jimmy Soleri and Jimmy Patterson. And it's a compendium of poetry and plays. And this idea of their publication is to have a legacy series. So they've started this where they choose poets who write in different genres. So this book has poems and plays and some interviews. I like very much that it has Anna Nicole, it has Mary Wollstonecraft, it has Mr. and Mrs. P. And what I like is they put the excerpts of the plays in that came from those poems. And I asked that they put one whole play in so that I could prove that I could finish a play, because these are just like excerpts. And that play, Pinecrest Rest Haven, to my embarrassment, it became very successful, but in New York, when Meryl went up to see it, there were 2 people in the audience, and Meryl was one of them. Thank you, Meryl. It was one of those lofts where you need a tetanus shot to get in, but it went on after that. So I'm going to read, first of all, about Anna Nicole Smith, who I really, really love. And she, as you know, was a bimbo. She was a model. Remember, she married the billionaire, and they didn't know whose kid she had. And I really, really was very touched by her life. So the first group of poems is about Anna Nicole Smith. She never had a chance. I mean, she had less connections than Jane Mansfield or Marilyn Monroe or Judy Garland. She had no connections whatsoever. And this first poem is called Self-Improvement. Anna Nicole would break her own mold. No one else could do it. She wanted to get to the bottom of something besides a bottle. Her stomach tightened when alpha pros tried to help her personality disorder. She had a problem, but it was her problem, hers, something to have and to hold. The adhesions to life still hurt. Now she was supposed to act dumb. The hardest part was to act. She was dumb. Why make it art? She was confused. The waiter said just yesterday, "You are well known. What's your name again?" Maybe the Walk of Fame wasn't all that much. She told herself there was work to do. Learn the ABCs of life, words that matched. Keep a journal. Play hide and seek with destiny, not push it. She spoke to herself sternly once. If only she had listened. Of course, she wanted love, as we all do, and so she hired a guy from the temp agency, and this is called Toy Town. At the edge of thought, a frozen pond melted. The guy in armor had taken it all off and was sitting on the floor sobbing. Anna had never seen such a thing. She should run, tell him she was expected somewhere or someone was waiting. She needed to be alone. This strapping brute of a man had suddenly become a minute creature. shaking with shame. Anna knew she needed imagination for this one, but trained otherwise from birth, never had a chance. She tried to look serious, she tried to look dignified, but the naked man on the floor reduced her to simplicity. Could she name the problem? Name her darkness? The side of her sleeve was offered to his running nose, her field of vision blurred. He told her this was his first day on the job, and he couldn't go through with it. He was a PhD student working his way through anthropology. She bent down and took his head in her arms. Now what would she do with her unused understanding? There under the bed, she saw her silver slipper. Somehow she knew it would fit. I don't know if there's really a temp agency, but I can imagine there is. Mary Wollstonecraft came after that, and I want to just tell you who she is. Mary Wollstonecraft was the first woman to write a serious book in English, and nobody really knew about her. They gave all the credit to her daughter Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. So I was very taken with these women in history that interested me, from Anna Nicole Smith to Mary Wollstonecraft. She was the first one who wrote argumentative prose about the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and she really, everyone hated her, the men hated her, the women. She was burned in effigy, and she loved the men, and that was a conflict because she wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. So she linked up with Gilbert Imlay, who was an American, and he did her wrong. She had his baby, but he wouldn't give her his name. He appropriated her work. And this is called Dead Cod in the Sun. Gilbert, again and again, Gilbert, again and again, you leave me for fantasy. Every woman is an idea you come to life for. When we dine, you look over my shoulder. When we shop, you compliment the shop girl's throat piece, pretending it would be good for me. As you dance with another, you talk of my brilliance, my genius, Gilbert. You keep talking about me so your partner cannot move away. And after she will say, he loves Mary so much. He did nothing but talk of her as he held me close. He must love her very much, for he leaned against me many times to say her name. I, a woman of words, freeze when I try to tell you this aloud. She finally found a man that was her intellectual equal, and that was William Godwin. He was a philosopher, and they were both bohemians, but she got pregnant, so they did agree to marry. And she died shortly after in childbirth, but she finally found the felicitous relationship she hoped for her whole life. And this is called I Love You, Mr. Godwin. It was rare in the extreme to find the kind of writing person I wanted to live with, the kind of writing person for whom loving was ill-advised, yet here I am in your abode. I am the Mary whose prayers are answered. I am the Mary where the death of my mind's eye could not stop the beating of my heart. I didn't want to lie fearful forever. I wanted to polish my boots and comb their tassels before putting them on to die. The world had forgot that women had thoughts worth hearing, and so they thought they had forgot to be heard. Until tonight, William Godwin, I kiss you on top of your big nose. This meeting we were having, what should we call it? A dream we were having together? I saw a picture of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, the baby that she died giving birth to. And she actually had this huge nose, so that I know that this is historically accurate, I'm going to say. Rose and Jimmy wanted a little bit of some books, so here's a couple from a really early book. And this is called Grandmother for Graziella Zoda. She was the first feminist I ever knew. She raised all these kids and started a business, and she was hot. Grandmother, what is the purpose of visits to me twice since you've died? Downstairs near a wood stove, I hear you in motion, always working. A long silken dress, tight sleeves at your wrist, soft above the elbow, wide top at your shoulder for free movement. When we were young, you didn't visit. You never baked a cake that I remember, or babysat or held me in your lap. You were in the man's part of business, running a man's business, calling the world to order. 6 children behind you raised single-handed in your large house. You were moving, always moving. When I kept losing things like my parents, my children, money, my time, and health, why did you appear in my room with gifts painted red, yellow, blue? Brilliant colored toys. What essential fact did you want me to know? That the body is the essence of the spirit and so must be in motion? Now that I've lost my foothold, my direction, my way, what is your message, strong spirit, strong grandmother? What is the meaning of your dream present? A bright clock shaped like a train, simply that it moves. Here's one from my father called Angelo. He came to this country when he was 12 and was the oldest of 7 children. And the one thing was that he wanted his girls to be safe. He didn't trust this world, this new world. And my sister and I couldn't do everything, a lot of things the other kids could do. And it really made me very angry. For 30 years, I wrote pissed off poems about him. But then I realized all the good things he did, and this is called Angelo. If I were to ask what you'd like, it might be to say something kind about you. Mention something from the past remembered with love. And so I do. Spaghetti sauce on the bus. You getting up at dawn to cook it, I carrying a pot across 2 states to Princeton, New Jersey, where my professor lived and where students met to read their poems, eating the sweet red specialty. Lugged up and down stairs under a huge lid. No one could buy that kind of cooking, at least in those days. Although now, of course, there's a restaurant on every corner. I don't know how I asked you, Father, to prepare this dish, or whether, in fact, you offered it, knowing your meal was rare in American houses. You remained at home that day while I entertained. I think you hoped to hear them say how sensitive you were. A loving father, and so they did. Admire you this night. Poets heard by candlelight, a fireplace, a stove. In a different room far away, you most likely wished I'd say they liked it. Italian food, something different for me to share. Perhaps I would say good of you. I'll bet you went to bed easily. This time, I've made her happy. It's true. The next poem is about being an artist, and when you go someplace in your head, nobody can follow you. I mean, even your husband. And it's really that, fortunately, he was an artist too, and we did get together for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but the thing is that in your separate world, nobody can enter that. And this is called Advice Regarding a Field of Reindeer in the Snow. If your husband is sleeping, you can leave him a message and go in the airplane with a mysterious pilot just for an hour to land in strange cities, farmlands, perhaps with wet leaves and wooden houses with ruffled curtains. You may walk to the edge of what you thought was a forest and look through a thick wall of ice with a gigantic hole and see field after field of reindeer brushed with snow, standing still. How beautiful! Like frozen statues, cold and silent, each staring straight at you, line after line of them. A sight you'd never have seen if you'd stayed home. You'll never forget it. But remember to leave a note before you go, or your return will be bleak. It will ruin everything. Trip, field, reindeer, snow. My husband died 4 years ago, and one of the things that you feel is anger. I mean, that's part of all the stuff. I mean, you still don't get it. you know, Ken was always a very adventurous person, and even before we were married, and he was always all over the world doing stuff. And so this poem is called Arabia. So you're gone, where you can't be reached. Maybe the left bank, working among the troops. There you are, holding on to adventure as if it were the code for eternal life, pressing on in your khaki vest through muddy fields and terse fogs, clouds of mosquitoes. Maybe you're flying over flaming fields. Never mind. I'll go to Boston, where I know somebody, and I'll find a job. I may move to Jacksonville, where we had so much fun. I'm sure you'll find yours, whatever that is, while I'm leafing through these damn letters yellowing in the attic drawer. And even if I read aloud the book I wrote for you, Arabia wins. You weren't put on earth to make me happy. You'll go anyway. I knew Ken when I was in the 7th grade and he was in the 9th grade. And this is called Safety. When you were in the 9th grade and I was in the 7th, you were a crossing guard keeping order at junior high school number 3. No one was disobedient when you wore that wide yellow strap across your vest. No one bruised another, caused trouble, or so much as threw a stone. No one cracked a joke about you, a man in uniform. How did that yellow vest feed your soul to let you know someday you'd fly a plane just to feel the power of a strap across your chest? What liberation to know how to be in charge, strong and capable, flying through gunfire and lightning again and again to come back to me. Although we were young, you were 15 and I was 13. Since then, I've never known the world without you. Now I must be 12. And one more about Ken. When we were, I don't know, in the 50s, the big thing was to wear identification bracelets. I don't know, I don't think they do that anymore, actually, with your name on one side and his name on the other. This is called identification. Upstairs on Warren Street, in the jewelry shop, we watched the jeweler carve the letters of our names with all the dollars that you'd saved. It was silver, with my name on the front in cursive swirls and yours block letters on the back. I was 17, and we were matching figured sweaters, the style, 1950. Blue with white stars, woolen, like sweaters at that time. Years passed. Houses and children came and went, and I forgot the time and money that we spent until you died. And then, among your personals, dog tags worn to Laos, although you thought it was just another cruise, there, attached to your dog tags, my ID bracelet, fixed chain to bring you safely home again. I put it around my wrist and wore it every day these past 2 years, until it went away last week. Where it dropped, I'll never know. I searched every store and drawer, drove down the swimming pool to reach the bottom. Others helped. I caught each place I'd been. And then Cindy bought a brand new one, which I'll engrave with our old names. But now I know the sign, I think. You, Ken, bought it, carried it to sea, and took it back again. Generous Indian giver, saying, I release you now to start life. You, my wife, in silver scroll, are free. And I'm going to end with one poem called Locator. I don't know why love works. It's undeniable. Every line of it hand-tooled like a finely wrought page. This is very exciting, the extra beat that my heart skipped, because marriage is discipline like an athlete's, with the grace of a dance. It's stillness and silence, the end of our differences. Surely our bodies were always prepared for it. I was on the verge of sorrow when I thought of this tissue, this sustaining legend. Here's the door that will not close. The outcome is uncertain. Why do you torture me for explanations? I only know love is the bed of gold we lie on. Thank you.
Okay, so here we are. Richard is the cleanup poet. But as you'll see, it's so interesting to me over these months and hearing the poets who have been here, and I've said this each time. It seems that these different voices, and with the kind of the kind of talking poetry that it's quick, not that it's written quickly, but it's that speech, and Grace's work. Richard's poems are very different. Now, I've known Richard for a very long time, although there was a long interruption. So when we first met, he was a lawyer, as you'll see in this little bio, which, by the way, this is done up by Sarah Danes, and it's one of the features of our series here. And then it says here that he retired. He hasn't retired. He's become a sculptor. As I said before, his work has been selected for outdoor exhibitions. He's a painter, and he has become a poet. Now, poet means maker, and he is, a poet. His wife, Kathy Lorr, is a fiction writer and poet, and she's going to be reading the next year. In this, Richard had sent me a bunch of poems back, I think it was, it was in the winter, and it was the first time I'd seen his work. And along with that was this poem that's in here. And he said, my wife is a poet, and I, her poet, tag along. And I remember writing to you, I said, tag along. You'll see that his poems are very different in that, although he may be reading different poems that I'm speaking about, but reflective, meditative. The poems move more slowly, but it's more, there's such a lyricism in the work, and it's as if you can taste the lines. They're melodic, but they're elaborative, and so there's a richness. There's a kind of, I don't want to say symphonic, but more, they're not story poems so much, like the poems that we've heard tonight. So I want to just take one example, if you don't mind, and it's the opening of "This Is Our Land," which you may or not be reading, but here's what I mean by the elaboration. Green, hard bamboo grew in our yard for years. I was its gardener. And then elaborates. Its mad surgeon, slashing out, seeking clean margins, an angry curtilage. I cleared paths and plots, tore weeds by roots, mediated the plaintive claims of blue hydrangeas and spiky pink delphiniums. See what I mean? It adds. I referred before to this repost that Thomas Wolfe had to Scott Fitzgerald, who said his novels were flabby. He said, well, Scott, there are putter-inners and taker-outers, and you're a putter-inner and I'm a taker-out. I'm a putter-inner and you're a taker-outer. Well, I don't think that Richard is a putter-inner, but the lines have that richness and sonorousness. So it's really a pleasure to welcome Richard here.
Well, you couldn't have asked for a sweeter introduction. And because Merrill has started with that poem, I think I'll finish it. It was going to be one of the last ones, but so I won't start where he stopped. I'm going to go to the beginning. Okay. This is our land, and I need to tell you one thing about it, which I have encouraged myself to think, what is this poem about? And I've come to the conclusion that in part it's a gentle protest about immigration, that it's a protest on behalf of the bamboo, that invasive species. But it cuts both ways. An invasive species can be hard to live with. Okay, this is our land. Green, hard bamboo grew in our yard for years. I was its gardener, its mad surgeon, slashing out, seeking clean margins, in angry curettage. I cleared paths and plots, tore weeds by roots, mediated the plaintive claims of blue hydrangeas and spiky pink delphiniums. Water and soil and rights to the sun's sweet warmth, I gave bamboo none at all and scattered them like decapitated snakes. One day, my body thickened, turned tubular and leafy, rooted, bound to the soil and to all the other bamboo that could be seen, lost in the thicket. My wife searched for me for days. The police with harried indifference. I could not speak, I could not move. I still cannot. She was stunned, she cried, just as lost as I. Though I flourished, affixed to the soil, growing taller and solemnly for years. Now I am part of a vast, resplendent, subterranean family, fierce and wild, churning ceaselessly in sinuous disorder. We channel tunnels below the soil, consume all the nutrients in a massive fibrous network of hairy, thick, woody roots folded over and over in an underground orgy like human hands, arms, breasts, necks, pressed between soiled, gritty, sleeping legs. Hated for our fecundity, our strength, our resilience, and above the ground, our tubular trunks sway, our green and yellow fingers do dreamy dancing. We shake in the breeze and bend under the weight of massive snow-white storms. Our long, shapely, spatulate leaves and our heads forced to touch the frozen grounds, our bodies arched in the catenary curve that warms humans when they see with triumph our helpless arch. Hated for the apparent idleness of our days, our towering pride. At our summit, we crest far into the sky, challenging the oldest maples, blocking blue sky and weather-white clouds, claiming the sun as our own. Densely packed together, we create a shade within our limbs that draws thrush and wrens, even on the brightest days, to sing their arias of dominance in the cool, clean, dark safety of our strong arms. I was going to start with a little comment about the weather, so I think I'll go back to that. The poem mentions Varanasi. Varanasi is a city known as the spiritual capital of India. It is said by Hindu believers that if you die in Varanasi, you go straight to heaven. So this poem is called Weather Reports. In Bangkok, thunder and rain. Last night in Provincetown, rain. It's raining in Barnstable, Belmont, Boston, and home. It's still raining in Rochester and all over St. Paul. But in Varanasi, not a cloud in the sky, incredibly hot, like your fever last March. One of my, when I started writing poetry, more of a little when I was a kid, but when I started writing poetry after I retired, I found it not so easy because it involves showing yourself. I mean, poems are an amalgam of fiction as well as fact, but I found it somewhat difficult. And I think there's only one thing that could be more difficult from time to time, and, except for tonight, of course, that's listening to poetry. That demands a lot, I think, from the listeners. All right, but anyway, so here's my poem called Writing Poetry. Standing in my trunks on a wintry river's solid edge, wind against my naked chest, my arches pink with cold. The water flies by, floating snowy chunks, landing on my trembling legs and toes, urges me to jump, be bold, or dress and leave this lonely, hard, and snowbound ledge. The river's turbulent, and I know that if at last I jump, I'll feel the water strip my body of its heat as I go down. My skin constrict, my organs race and go from cold to blue, and heart almost burst, cycle wildly from stop to pump. Feel my body yawing in the bitter cold, but I'll not drown. Poised to plunge, I hear my son's faint voice, like a snowy egret's call. Startled, I flex, extend, raise my body towards the sky, and dive. So, when I first got out of the workforce, I took up metal sculpture, as Merrill mentioned, and other things, I guess. And that metal sculpture took me into the heat of forging, you know, the forge that blacksmiths would use as opposed to counterfeiters, and forging and welding, and then to poetry. And it seemed to me there was a connection. So this poem is called Words Like Scraps of Steel. Cutting steel plates into odd shapes with a torch. Hot yellow embers arc in the air like so many tortured ions seeking places to burn. Like fireworks and tracer bullets, they threaten the eyes and the skin when you ready the steel for the forge. And in the roaring, deafening forge, flames lick your gloved hands. Heat, thick and hot, enfolds those hands, your face and breath. Fire engulfs, then suffuses the steel, orange to red, until at last screaming yellow solids exude drops of molten metal like drops of milk from a breast. You cannot embrace hot metals, unlike words that may be turned over in the cool saliva of your mouth. You must coax steel at a safe distance with tongs and tools. Yet words are also melded molten, like scraps of steel still hot from the fire, burning with danger and hope. One of my early art teachers, I do a little painting and drawing and so on, which was so difficult for me as a boy. And a funny story about that, which I will not tell now. But anyway, so one of my best teachers early on was my wife's sister, Betsy. Betsy was an artist, a young lady, who had a wonderful approach to painting and drawing, and her drawings were as beautiful as she was. After all, she's related to my wife. And she developed, unfortunately, Parkinson's at the age of 37, and struggled courageously with her illness until she died at the age of 59. So this poem is for Betsy. She taught me things I never thought I'd know, how line emerges in a well-drawn sketch, how edges slowly grow and end, imperceptibly arising from fleshy, volumetric planes, expanding outwardly until they can't, dying into graphite edges, sometimes hard, sometimes permeated by the light. The image of her flustered, shyly grinning face, her mouth shaped in an O of wonder, her body lithe and singing, drawn into ruin. Sketched in generous, rhythmic, gaunt and hungry, slender, soft, erasable marks. Marks the eye picks up and misconstrues as life. Now, one of the interesting things about learning poetry is learning to write love songs, love poetry. And I think I have discovered a number of love experiences which are not regularly recognized. Some of them probably are. And I'll read you, for instance, one, his love story, 1964. We could call this misguided parental lover. Misguided parental love, okay. He came home smelling of wildflowers and weed. College, he said, had taught him something he knew we would love even more than our favorite meal. We sat in his old room, and he passed us his tiny pipe, lighting and relighting it as it smoldered cold. His mother had an eager gaze and her easy-breathing smile. All I got was the blackest of headaches, and all I could see was my son falling through space, his balance lost, toppled back into the dirt-strewn orphanage of my past. Sleep overcame them, and I lurched upright, flushing the stash. Then I called armed men to arrest my son's fall. The next poem is more of a typical form of love, and it's to my wife in San Diego. Well, we would call this supportive love, I guess. I want the universe to write you a love song for white-clad sisters and suave, studious men to wrap trembling you in their arms and set you free from any barking birds or stinging bugs that could worry your hair or block your way to a coronation on Coronado. A song to wrap you in amethyst waves, letting the sun's warm light gently fall upon you. Listen, the universe is singing. Coronado, of course, I should have mentioned it, is an island off of San Diego. The next one is a pantoum, and many of you may know what a pantoum is, but in case you don't, it's a series of quatrains with certain ordered repetitions of lines. So the second and fourth lines of the first stanza become the first and the third lines of the next stanza, and so on until you get to the last stanza, where the first and the third lines of the first stanza become the second and fourth lines of the last stanza. So there'll be a test on it later. Okay. And this is a pantoum about failed love. I guess we should recognize it as a typical type of love, but it's a little different. Okay. She was all gone, with nothing left to spare. She took her scent and the flavor of her tongue. She cleared out her clothes and most of his despair, took her harsh words as well as her disdain. She took her scent and the flavor of her tongue, though he can still hear blackbirds calling out her harshest words as well as her disdain. He can smell the sunlight, heating all that is. He can still hear lost blackbirds calling her sweetest words, her tiny laugh. He can smell the sunlight heating all that is, even though the house is shaded and he is very cold. He thinks of their grumbling, discordant words, and though she is gone and there is nothing left to spare, he could laugh as well as cry out loud, for she has cleared out her clothes and most of his despair. Now, there's another type of love, not supportive, not failed, but something we might call imaginative love. That is to say, the love you hope your partner has for you based on your assessment of the reasonable evidence. And this allows me, as the writer, to put my thoughts into my partner's mouth. Okay, here we go. I think my son once objected to this. Okay. It's entitled At Night. Write me something, sweetie. Show me that you care. Craft your lines around me, touch me with your not quite silver hair. I can feel your hard and balky fingers weaving words, brocading on my breast. Feel the steady rhythm of your beating chest, hear you as you struggle with the pen. Breathing like the roar of open ocean waters flowing further out to sea, like the dew that falls from moist and burning eyes. The sounds of country music filling me with joy. Come to me, my husband dear, keep me warm and company in bed. Give me songs and laughter, though the bright of day has fled. Another love song was not also quite love, and this would be Love by Dominance. And I address it in a somewhat lighthearted poem. It's called Engaged to be Married. A pretty troll went walking and took me by the hand. She pulled me through her gnarly door, thick glass shards, wood shreds, loud sounds and pain. My ear and nose fell off and landed in her hair. She jumped and snarled a bit while fear and awe were in the blood and spit that gathered on the floor. She drew pink bubbles from my mouth. I smelt her pungent scallion air. She sat on me and pinched my hand. She stroked my broken nose, laughing as she sang, "Oh, it's you, my own pretty one. I should, I would, I do propose." Well, we've never met anybody like that. And finally, there's something we call mature love, or we could, and it's and this is a sonnet and traditional form. I call it After Years. If you, my love, loved me as I loved you, and you were young as I when first we tried, then pale red blooms would glow a brighter hue, a rose would take you as its own sweet bride. But how my eyes have clouded, hair has grayed, your balance tipsy, striding up the stairs. Our love of life not frail, though hurt and frayed. Love alters as we age, but not love's care. A still liquid light illuminates our days. Your steadfast countenance, your quiet smile, induce an inner sun to pierce the haze, and prove your tender arts do yet beguile. Our deaths will sadly come of that, I'm sure. Till then, our loves will brighten and endure. Well, what's left to talk about? A few things. There's always poems of loss and aging, associated with some of the aging. So the first one I have for you is, it's called Playing Chess in Manhattan. And one of my pastimes as an adult retired guy is to play chess. I teach a little chess. I've always played a little chess. And it's a game my father taught me in 1948 when we lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So, playing chess in Manhattan. When I was 5, you taught me chess, how knights and bishops move, so tricky, angled, hard to guess. You saw my play improve. How strong the queen and weak the king, the embryonic pawn becomes at last most anything, though kings can't be its spawn. We huddled over clashing pieces, the kitchen lights are dim. Once loud, our talk now ceases. My chance to win grows slim. I think you planned to help me win. You'd give your queen away, your face a kind old patient grin, but I can't see the play. I wonder then if Mom's the queen and you're the sweet, weak king. If I'm the pawn with future sheen, what will my choices bring? 70 or so have passed. Both king and queen have died. I played for years. I've won, been thrashed, seen pawns turn queens who cried. I don't know how we're doing on time. And Meryl, you bring the curtain down anytime you're ready. I lost track. I was going to have some kind of a marker. So if I can, I'd like to read two, but I think I'm getting the one figure. Okay. So this one is about my family, and it was published in the Sligo Journal of Arts and Letters, and here it goes. It's called After the Fire, Bone. Looking at this piece of bone, not quite the purest white, striated, odorless, fire-cleansed. In its fragile hollows, tiny streaks, light vanilla stains where her hearty marrow might have been, the urgent music of her youth. Bone should be hard, should endure, but draw too close to touch this mute, bitter piece of life, and seeming solid bone becomes soft talcum, formless, like some deep memories that once recalled change their content, colors, shapes, and speech. Softer than the sand on ocean fronts where she took her family, teaching her sons the love of pulsing waves, the acrid smell of salt, her bones then as now, not strong enough to change our angry, mad rivalries, our unsheathed fists. And now I go to my only brother, he with white grizzled hair, and softly say, "Good that you are here." Softly rest my hand on his arm, fearing the loss of my memories, of my right to rage, fearing that under my gentle touch, he too will turn to dust. And if you don't mind, I will read one more, and then it will be refreshment time. Okay. See, I didn't know if I get up here, I wouldn't want to let go. All right. Okay, this is a poem about aging called A Bird's Eye View. I'm an old finch cock, masquerading young. Bright feathers, yellow, white, tight strung. With weak black eyes, slack beak and tongue, mistaking twigs for worms, pecking in the dung. Gliding in warm currents, I squint and stare, till hunger drives me from my airborne lair. But seeing rival raptors dive down for river fare, I float to wooded ground and hidden eat with care. Now at night, nestled with my old finch hen, we spin stories of our days, what will be and what has been. As I dream of indigo, of the iris azure sky we're in, I fancy that I hear tomorrow's starling songs begin.
Time has passed rather quickly, it seems. So why don't we have one last hand for Grace, for Randy, for Richard. It's been a lovely evening. I do want to tell you that this reading will be on YouTube probably within a week and a half or so, maybe before then. Yeah? It's on there right now. You can go home and watch yourself. Next month we have an open reading, and I hope you will show up to hear, to participate. We really like the participation. You don't have to be writing, a book of poems, but if you're up for getting, you're just sharing a poem, that would be great. And we have a small reception outside, so it would really be very nice. Grace has some books for sale, and they'll be out there. And please go on, talk outside. Okay, thank you for coming.